Welcome back to the deep dive. It is good to have you with us again. We have a rather substantial stack of notes and research to get through today, and I am particularly looking forward to this conversation because we are going to change our pace a little.
Oh, how so?
Well, usually when we engage with history, and specifically the history of the early church or the Roman Empire, we have a tendency to focus on the marquee names.
Right, the big players.
The headline acts, exactly. We think of Peter preaching to thousands at Pentecost, or Paul debating the philosophers on Mars Hill, or, the Caesars ruling from their thrones in Rome. The history books, quite naturally, are written in bold capital letters.
It makes sense. That is the great man theory of history, isn't it? We tend to look at the movers and the shakers, the people who forced the world to turn.
Exactly. But today, I want to shuffle the deck. We are going to base our discussion on a truly wonderful, thoughtful essay by Brother Woody Brum titled Publius, A Hospitable Leader, Witnessing God's Power. And this source material, it forces us to look away from the center stage and focus on the margins. We are zooming in on a very specific, very quiet corner of the ancient world, and a man who probably thought he was just having a chaotic week at the office, but who ended up playing a pivotal role in theological history.
I have been spending time with Broom's essay, and I have to say, it is a refreshing change of pace. It feels less like a high-stakes theological debate and more like a study in human decency. It feels very warm, very pastoral.
That is exactly the tone we want to strike today. We are looking at Acts chapter 28, specifically verses 7 through 10. But our mission isn't just to recount the narrative of the book of Acts.
Right.
Our mission is to understand the anatomy of a divine appointment.
Uh-huh.
We want to dissect how a catastrophic shipwreck, a sick father, and a Roman bureaucrat named Publius all collided to show us something profound about how God operates in the world.
It really is the butterfly effect, but in Scripture.
Yep.
So it flaps its wings, and history changes.
Precisely. We are going to see how God uses ordinary kindness to turn absolute disaster into glory. But to really understand this, to feel the weight of what happens in this text, we cannot stay in the abstract. We have to get our feet wet. We need to go to the island of Malta in the 1st century.
And not the modern tourist version of Malta, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
We need the Roman version.
Correct. So let's set the scene carefully. Brother Brum points out that we're on the island of Malta. Now, for the listener who hasn't looked at a map of the Mediterranean lately, Malta is a relatively small rock sitting smack in the middle of the sea.
It's south of Sicily, right north of Africa.
Exactly. It wasn't a metropolis. It wasn't Ephesus with its great library or Corinth with its massive markets, but it was vital.
In what sense? If it's just a small rock, why does Rome care about it?
Think of it as the essential service station on the superhighway of the ancient world. If you were shipping grain from Egypt to Rome, which was the absolute lifeblood of the empire.
The breadbasket of the empire.
The breadbasket. You were likely sailing past Malta. The grain ships, the military transports, the merchant vessels, they all navigated these waters. Because of that strategic location, it was firmly under the thumb of Rome. This wasn't a lawless outpost. It was a critical node in the imperial machine.
Which implies structure. It implies hierarchy. You don't just leave a strategic node ungoverned.
It implies a government. And that brings us to our protagonist, Publius. The text in Acts 28.7 is very specific about him. It calls him the chief official of the island.
Okay.
Now, often when we read the Bible, we might glaze over titles, assuming they're just generic honorifics. But Broom highlights something fascinating here regarding the accuracy of Luke, the author of Acts.
The Greek word used there is protos, right?
Yes, protos, literally the first.
And that isn't just Luke being poetic or, exaggerating for effect.
No, and this is where the archaeology backs up the narrative beautifully. We have found inscriptions on the island from this specific time period that use that exact title, protos, to describe the Roman governor.
Wow. So it was his actual title.
It suggests Publius held the highest seat of authority on the island. He was likely reporting directly to the propraetor in Sicily.
So let's profile this man for a moment. If he is the protos, he isn't a nobody.
Far from it. This is a man of significant substance. He has wealth, he has social standing, and he has the weight of Rome on his shoulders. The text mentions he had an estate.
Which means more than just a big house.
Oh, absolutely. In that context, we are talking about a villa, servants, land, and likely a very structured, comfortable life. His job was to maintain the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
Keep the shipping lanes open, keep the locals quiet.
Keep the tax revenue flowing. He represents order. He is an agent of structure and civilization.
Which makes the next part of the story so jarring. because into this world of manicured villas and Roman efficiency, we have a literal collision.
This shipwreck. We have to understand the scale of this disaster. This isn't a small fishing boat tipping over in a lake. This is an Alexandrian grain ship. These were the super freighters of their day. And according to Acts 27, they have just come through 2 weeks of what was called the Northeaster.
That sounds ominous.
It was a cyclonic tempest. Imagine complete darkness, no sun, no stars for navigation, which meant they were blind.
For 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks, they had thrown the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. They were starving because they hadn't been able to cook or eat properly in 14 days due to the violent motion of the vessel. And then crash. They hit a sandbar off the coast of Publius's orderly island.
And it isn't just a few sailors washing up on the beach.
No, it is 276 people.
That is a small army.
It is a mob. And look at the demographic of that mob. You have hardened sailors. You have Roman soldiers, likely jumpy and aggressive because they have almost died and failed in their mission.
And prisoners.
And prisoners, serious prisoners being transported to Rome for trial, including the Apostle Paul.
So, put yourself in Publius's sandals for a moment. You wake up, look out the window of your villa, and there are nearly 300 soaking wet, desperate, potentially dangerous men washing up on your jurisdiction.
It is a security nightmare. It is a humanitarian crisis. And we have to remember, in the ancient world, the standard operating procedure for this kind of thing wasn't always, let's get them blankets and hot cocoa.
Right. Coastal law in antiquity could be brutal. I read that sometimes locals would scavenge the wreck or even kill the survivors to take their goods. It was often survival of the fittest.
Or, from a Roman administrative perspective, you might round them up and throw them in a holding cell until you can sort out who is a prisoner and who isn't. You certainly don't invite them over for dinner.
But that is exactly where this story pivots.
It is. Brome's essay points out the unusual kindness of the locals. The barbarians, as Luke calls them.
And we should clarify, barbarians. There isn't an insult.
Not at all. It simply meant they didn't speak Greek. So, they built fires. They tried to warm these people up. That is the first layer of grace. But then the camera zooms in on Publius.
He goes beyond just building a fire on the beach.
Acts 28.7 says, he welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days.
Okay, I want to drill down on that. Us. Who is he actually hosting? He can't be all 276 people.
That is a critical distinction and a very good question. He probably couldn't fit all 276 survivors in his guest rooms. The us almost certainly refers to the leadership team.
So, the Roman centurion, the ship's captain.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
The Roman centurion Julius, perhaps the ship's captain, and then Paul and his companions Luke and Aristarchus.
But that includes a prisoner.
It does.
Paul is a prisoner of the state. He is in chains, technically.
Think about the risk Publius is taking here. He is the highest-ranking official on the island. He is inviting a man accused of sedition, or at least causing trouble serious enough to appeal to Caesar, into his private residence.
It's a huge breach of protocol.
It defies social stratification.
Yeah.
It defies the safety protocols. It's a radical act of trust.
It is what Brome calls hospitality as a means of grace. But, practically speaking, it is also expensive.
It is incredibly costly, feeding, clothing, and housing these men for 3 days, and doing it with generous hospitality, as the text says.
Right.
He didn't just give them a crust of bread and a spot on the floor. He treated them like dignitaries.
This idea of hospitality philoxenia in the Greek, it's more than just being polite, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The word literally translates to love of strangers. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was a high cultural value, certainly. But this goes beyond obligation. This is a powerful, influential man serving the vulnerable. And what I love about Brome's analysis here is that he notes this act of hospitality set the stage. It built the platform for what was coming next.
He built the stage without knowing there was going to be a play.
Exactly. He didn't know who Paul was. He didn't know he was hosting the author of half the New Testament. He just saw a need and he met it. But, and here's the tension, while Publius is playing the gracious host, he is hiding a desperate secret.
His father.
Yes, while he is feeding these strangers, his father is in the back room dying. Acts 28.8 is very specific. It says the father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery.
Now, Luke wrote Acts, and Luke was a physician.
Yeah.
So we can assume this isn't just a generic description of being sick.
Right. This is not a throwaway line. We get a clinical diagnosis here. In the ancient world, and even in some places today, this condition is known as Malta fever.
That's brucellosis, isn't it, from goat's milk?
Yes, exactly. It is caused by a microorganism found in goat's milk. It causes recurring fevers, intense joint pain, and sweating. Combine that with dysentery.
That's a deadly combination.
You are talking about severe dehydration, inflammation, and infection. For an elderly man in the first century without IV fluids or antibiotics, this was essentially a death sentence.
So Publius is the first man of the island. He has all the power, all the money, all the connections, but he is completely helpless against this bacteria.
It is the great equalizer, isn't it? Death and sickness don't care about your title or your bank account. So you have this fascinating dynamic. Publius is caring for Paul's physical needs, food and shelter, while Publius himself has a deep emotional and physical need that he cannot fix.
And Paul finds out.
Paul hears about it, and this is where the two worlds really fuse together. Paul doesn't just send a message, thoughts and prayers. The text says he entered the room.
Which, again, is breaking protocol. You don't just wander into the sick room of the governor's father. Plus, dysentery is contagious. It is messy. It smells.
Paul didn't care. Compassion drove him into the mess. And look at the simplicity of the miracle. Rome emphasizes this in the essay. Paul didn't put on a big show. He didn't call down lightning.
No ceremony.
No, he did two simple things. He prayed and he laid his hands on him.
Connecting the power of God to the specific human need.
And the result was immediate. The fever broke. The infection vanished. The man stood up. He was healed.
I can only imagine the silence in that room, followed by the explosion of joy. You have the Roman official, the Jewish prisoner, and the healed father standing there.
It must have been electric. And on an island that small, you cannot keep a secret like that. Brome calls it the ripple effect.
Word gets out fast.
Very fast. The text says, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. It turned into a full-blown revival of healing. The governor's villa essentially became a hospital.
And suddenly, the dynamic flips completely. Publius started by caring for the prisoners.
And now the prisoner is caring for the entire island.
And the reciprocity at the end is really touching.
It is, because remember, they washed up with nothing. But Acts 28.fen says the islanders honored us with many honors and supplied us with everything we needed for the rest of the journey.
So because Publius opened his home for 3 days, his people were healed, and the survivors were provisioned for 3 months.
That is the mathematics of God's grace. The return on investment is exponential. But I want to pause here. We have told the story, and it is a beautiful story. But this is a deep dive.
Right.
We need to get under the hood and look at the engine driving this narrative. Broome identifies 4 key theological pillars here that we need to unpack.
Okay, let's do it. Where do we start?
Let's start with the big one, providence.
Providence.
It is a heavy theological word. But in this context, we are talking about the doctrine that God is sovereignly directing the affairs of the universe, including the weather, including political appointments, to accomplish his purposes.
It forces us to look at the shipwreck differently, doesn't it? It wasn't just bad luck.
It demands that we reframe the disaster. To the sailors, the storm was a failure of navigation. To the owners of the ship, it was a financial loss. To Paul, it was physically exhausting and terrifying. But through the lens of providence, that shipwreck was a divinely appointed opportunity.
That is tough to swallow when you're in the middle of the storm, to think this hurricane is an appointment.
It is incredibly difficult. But look at the evidence. God had people on Malta. Publius, his father, the islanders, who he wanted to reach. They were not going to go to Jerusalem to hear the gospel.
And Paul wasn't planning a missionary journey to Malta. It wasn't on the itinerary.
Not at all. So how do you get the messenger to the audience?
You wreck the ship.
You use the storm as transportation. Brome calls it a providential chain. Link 1, the storm. Link 2, the shipwreck. Link 3, Publius's position as protos. Link 4, his hospitality. Link 5, the father's sickness.
If any one of those links breaks, the story falls apart. If Publius is a harsh man and locks them up, no healing. If the father isn't sick, no demonstration of power.
Exactly. God used Roman politics, Mediterranean weather patterns, and a bacterial infection to weave together a moment of redemption. It challenges our view of interruptions. We see a flat tire or a lost job as a blockage. God often sees it as a pivot point.
It reminds me of that idea that God is the great weaver. We see the messy knots on the back of the tapestry. He sees the picture on the front.
That is a beautiful image. And that leads us to the second theological point Brome raises. Hospitality as a means of grace.
We touched on this, but let's go deeper. You were saying hospitality is actually a spiritual tool.
It is a conduit. Think about the physical space. The miracle happened because Publius provided the space for it to happen. He created the environment where ministry could flourish.
It democratizes ministry, doesn't it? Because not everyone can be Paul. Not everyone has the gift of healing or preaching.
Right. Most of us are not apostles, but almost all of us can be Publius.
We can offer a meal.
We can open a door, we can share a meal, we can offer a blanket. And the theology here is that those material acts of service are the bridge over which the spiritual cargo travels. If the bridge isn't there, the cargo doesn't cross.
So Publius is a partner in the miracle, just as much as Paul is.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the third point, apostolic authority and signs. We have to address the miracles. Why so many? Why so public?
It is the book of Acts. Things are, well, they're louder in Acts.
They are, and we have to remember where we are in salvation history. This is a transitional period. The gospel is breaking out of the Jewish container and spilling into the Gentile world.
Okay.
These people on Malta, they didn't know the Torah. They didn't know the prophecies of Isaiah.
So if Paul stands up and says, according to the prophet Micah, they're going to look at him blankly.
Exactly. They have no reference point. So the miracles serve as the credentials. They are the seal of authenticity. When Paul heals the father, he is demonstrating that the God he serves has power over life and death power that the Roman gods didn't seem to have.
It validates the messenger so the message can be heard.
Correct. Brom makes a helpful clarification here for the listener. While we believe God certainly still heals today, the specific explosive nature of these apostolic miracles had a unique purpose: to authenticate the apostles as they laid the foundation of the church.
So it was God signing Paul's passport, in a way.
That's a great way to put it, and that connects to the fourth point,
Yeah.
the dispensational perspective.
That is a $10 theology word.
It is, isn't it? But it's important. Dispensational here refers to how God manages his relationship with humanity in different eras. Malta is a beautiful picture of the church age, or the times of the Gentiles.
It is showing the scope, the global reach.
Yes. Here we are, about as far from Jerusalem as you can get, on a pagan island with a Roman official. And God pours out his spirit there. It shows that the plan was never meant to stay local. It is inherently global. God is gathering a people from every nation under heaven, and he will use even a shipwreck to find them.
It is a reminder that no one is too far out for God to find.
No one. So we have the history, we have the theology, but the deep dive is about application. We need to land the plane.
What do we do with this?
What do we living in 2026 do with Publius?
The first thing that hits me is the significance of the unaware actor. Publius didn't know he was writing scripture. He didn't know we'd be talking about him 2,000 years later.
He had no idea. He thought he was just handling a crisis. And I think the lesson there is that we never know the full weight of our actions in real time. You hold a door, you welcome a new neighbor, you listen to someone who is grieving. You have no idea if that is the link in the chain for something massive God is doing.
Do not despise the day of small things.
Exactly. Simple acts have eternal echoes. We need to stop judging the value of our days by how spiritual they feel and start trusting that God uses the mundane.
Then there's the lesson of the unexpected place.
The detour.
We all have them. The career path that hits a wall. The health scare. The shipwreck.
And the natural human reaction, my reaction is frustration. God, I had a plan. I had a timeline. I was supposed to be in Rome by now. But the story of Publius tells us, you aren't off track. You are just on a different track.
Paul did eventually get to Rome.
He did, but he had work to do in Malta first. If you are in a season that feels like a detour, look around. There might be a Publius you are supposed to meet. There might be a father you're supposed to pray for. The interruption is the ministry.
That is a hard shift to make mentally, but it changes everything. Instead of fighting the current, you start looking for the assignment.
And to fulfill that assignment, we need partnership. This is the third lesson, the Publius-Paul partnership.
We touched on this earlier, the resources versus the spiritual authority.
It is a model for the healthy church. We have this tendency to create a hierarchy where the Pauls, the preachers, the missionaries are the varsity team, and the Publiuses, the business owners, the organizers, the homeowners, are the JV team.
I just write the checks or I just set up the chairs.
But this story destroys that. Without Publius's estate, where does Paul sleep? Without Publius's influence, does Paul get access to the sick?
And without Paul, Publius's father dies.
It is symbiotic. It is complementary. If you are a Publius, if God has given you resources, a home, administrative skill, do not minimize that. Your role is to build the stage.
Hmm.
If you are a Paul, if you have the message, your role is to step onto that stage and deliver. We need both.
Finally, I think we have to come back to the compassion of God.
The scope of it. Who gets healed in this story? A Roman official's dad. He wasn't a strategic key to the underground church. He wasn't a young influencer. He was an old, dying man on an island.
And God stopped the entire itinerary of the greatest missionary in history just to touch that one man.
That is the heart of God. No person is too insignificant. No location is too remote. God didn't save his power for the forum in Rome. He poured it out in a bedroom in Malta.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this and you feel like you are in a forgotten place, maybe a small town, a difficult marriage, a job nobody notices, God knows your address. He knows your Malta.
That is incredibly reassuring.
As we wrap this up, I want to leave the listener with a challenge. The challenge of Publius.
To be the host.
To be the host, to view your life, your home, your resources, not as a fortress to defend, but as an embassy to open. We live in a world that is terrified of strangers. We build walls. Publius built a bridge.
There is that verse in Hebrews that Broom ends the essay with. I think we have to read it.
It is the perfect capstone. Hebrews 13, verse 2. I'm going to read it slowly. Let this settle over you. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it.
Without knowing it. That's the part that always gets me.
The mystery of it. You don't know who is standing at your door. It might look like a shipwrecked prisoner. It might be an angel. It might be the very person God intends to use to bless your life in return. But you will never know if you keep the door locked.
That is a beautiful place to land.
Before we go, I want to offer a short blessing for you, the listener. A prayer that you would take this story of Publius and let it shape your week.
Please do.
May you have the eyes to see the shipwrecked travelers in your path this week. May you have the grace to open your hands and your home, even when it is inconvenient. And in your own Malta moments, when plans fail and storms come, may you see God's power displayed through simple kindness. May you realize that you are exactly where God wants you to be, ready to witness his glory. Amen. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.